Bonjour tout le monde. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here today to mark the 20 years since the abduction and unlawful imprisonment of Uyghur-Canadian citizen Mr. Huseyin Celil. I'd like to begin with by introducing Mehmet Tohti, the Executive Director of Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project. Mehmet is a prominent Uyghur-Canadian activist and representative of the community in Canada, campaigning for the rights of Uyghurs over a decade. I'd like to welcome Mr. Tohti.
Thank you. I would like to directly appeal to the Government of Canada. Today marks 20 years since the disappearance and the continued imprisonment of Canadian citizen Huseyin Celil by the People's Republic of China. 20 years without a single phone call. 20 years without a voice. 20 years without single consular access. 20 years without a Canadian father speaking to his Canadian-born children and his Canadian wife, left alone, almost abandoned in Chinese solitary confinement. This is more than enough. This is not a political statement. This is a human one. We are not asking for the resolution of a complex diplomatic issue today. We are asking for something far more basic, something deeply human. We ask the Government of Canada to engage with China, our new strategic partner, to secure one simple act: a phone call between Mr. Celil and his children, and prove that he's still alive. Just one conversation, just one moment of connection after 2 decades of silence. Chinese refusal to recognize Huseyin Celil's Canadian citizenship should not and cannot be an excuse for silence anymore. We all should refuse that excuse. That the Government of Canada has recognized Huseyin Celil as a Canadian citizen since November 15th, 2005. No Canadian family should suffer such isolation. No Canadian children should grow up never hearing their father's voice. We respectfully appeal to the Prime Minister Mark Carney, to invite Mr. Celil's children and the family to his office and to share that moment visibly and sincerely with Chinese officials. This would be a gesture of humanity that transcends politics. Such a small act of compassion has been denied to this family for 20 years, across all successive governments since 2006. Canada has the means to raise this issue through diplomatic channels, through direct communication, and through sustained engagement. This is not about confrontation. This is about compassion. It is about remembering that behind every case is a family, waiting, hoping, and enduring. Today, we call on the Government of Canada to take this small but meaningful step, to act with urgency, with humanity, and with purpose. Because after 20 years, even the smallest gesture like this can mean everything. Thank you.
Next up, we have Alex Neve, who's the professor in international human rights law at the University of Ottawa and Dalhousie University, and a senior fellow with the University of Ottawa's Graduate School of Public and International Affairs. Among many roles, he has served as the Secretary General of Amnesty International Canada from 2000 to 2020, during which time he took part in over 40 human rights research and advocacy delegations across the world. He has been a prominent figure advocating for the Uyghurs. Welcome.
Thank you so much, and bonjour tout le monde. It is staggering to realize it has been 20 years since Huseyin Celil's nightmare began with his arrest in Uzbekistan. A week later, on April the 4th, 2006, when I was Secretary General of Amnesty International Canada, we wrote to the Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time, Peter MacKay, about Husein's case. We noted the very real concern that he was at risk of being sent to China at any time, where he would certainly face grave human rights abuses. We urged the minister to intervene immediately and forcefully with the Uzbekistani government to forestall that from happening. 3 weeks later, I joined Hussein's wife, Kamila Telendabayeva, and the family's lawyer, Chris McLeod, for a national press conference here on the Hill, at which time we released an open letter to Stephen Harper from 12 organizations in Canada calling on him to intervene directly and personally with the Uzbekistani government and to turn to other governments, including Russia and the United States, to exert pressure on Uzbekistan. However, within 3 months of his unlawful arrest in Uzbekistan, Huseyin Celil had indeed been secretively, clandestinely, and unlawfully sent back to China. And two decades later, that is where he remains. 20 years of being apart from Kamila, 20 years during which his 4 young sons have grown up without a father. We will never know if more had been done to prevent Uzbekistan handing him over to China. Might Huseyin Celil be free and with his family today? Instead, he has disappeared into an abyss of injustice. And now, for nearly 10 years, there's absolutely no knowledge of his whereabouts, his well-being, or his fate. The Canadian government has been frozen out, told by Chinese officials that they do not recognize his Canadian citizenship. No Canadian official has ever been given access to him during those 20 years. Has Canada pushed back forcefully? We saw what forceful looks like when the government launched enormous efforts to free Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor from unjust imprisonment in China. They were, of course, thankfully released. We have not seen anything even remotely close to that on behalf of Huseyin Celil. Do foreign-born Canadian citizens matter less? Prime Minister Carney has made it clear he is determined to deepen and to expand Canada's relationship with China. Against that backdrop, Huseyin Celil's case can no longer be pushed to the side. Securing his freedom must become a top priority in all of Canada's dealings with China. Every exchange, every conversation, every meeting must begin and end with one simple demand: let Huseyin Celil come home. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have MP Sameer Zuberi, who's the Liberal Member of Parliament for Pierrefonds and longstanding advocate for human rights and vulnerable communities. In February 2023, he introduced Motion 62 in the House of Commons. It calls for the Government of Canada to resettle 10,000 Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslim refugees in need of protection. The motion received an unanimous consent, including the support from the Prime Minister and all of Cabinet.
Bonjour et merci tout le monde d'être ici aujourd'hui. Nous sommes ici pour parler sur le cas de Huseyin Celil, un citoyen canadien d'origine ouïghour, qui est détenu au Chine depuis 20 ans. This story about Huseyin Celil is a tragedy. Huseyin Celil is a Canadian citizen. He has family in Canada, a loving wife, and 4 loving children, one of whom he has never met, a 19-year-old son. Why? Because he's been detained for 20 years within China. Today, we are appealing for humanitarian and compassionate considerations, for after such a long ordeal of 20 years, that he be let go. It's enough time. He must be reunited with his family, his loved ones, his wife, and children. We need to ensure that we are doing everything within our power as a country to see that that happens. This here today, this press conference here today, is being done across party lines. J'ai une collègue avec moi du Bloc québécois. Nous avons des avocats et d'autres activistes de communauté ouïghour et de la société civile. We are here together. As was mentioned previously, the activism around this issue is not a partisan issue. It's one that cuts across party lines. It's one that Canadians support. We must see this ordeal come to an end. So my message is an appeal on humanitarian and compassionate considerations, that Mr. Celil is permitted one phone call to his family, to speak with his family, so his wife and children can hear his voice, the voice of a husband, the voice of a father, a voice that some in his family have never heard because that phone call to date has not been permitted. Secondly, and critically, we ask for after 20 years that enough is enough. Let's see him be released. Huseyin Celil is a Canadian citizen. We are all standing up for him today. We will continue standing up for him into the future. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Next up, we have MP Alexis Brunelle-Duceppe, who's the Canadian Member Parliament representing Lake Saint-Jean and serving as the Bloc Québécois critic for foreign affairs. He's been an outspoken advocate for human rights, including raising concerns about the treatment of Uyghurs and calling for accountability on abuses in China.
Bonjour tout le monde, merci d'être ici avec nous aujourd'hui. C'est une histoire d'une tristesse infinie, mais surtout, c'est une histoire complètement absurde si on regarde simplement les faits. Et les faits, c'est qu'un citoyen canadien est emprisonné en Chine et qu'il n'a jamais eu le droit à aucun service consulaire depuis 20 ans. Professeur Neve a soulevé une question extrêmement importante. Est-ce qu'un citoyen canadien qui a obtenu sa citoyenneté après la naissance vaut moins aux yeux du gouvernement qu'un citoyen canadien qui a obtenu sa citoyenneté à la naissance? Et il faut se poser cette question-là, puisque si on regarde les faits, c'est un peu ce qu'on a vu qui s'est produit là présentement. Et on ne peut pas, pour M. Carney, être d'un côté se dire le grand défenseur du droit international et de l'autre côté aller serrer la main de Xi Jinping en se vantant d'avoir réchauffé les relations diplomatiques. Est-ce que réchauffer les relations diplomatiques, ça veut dire faire un deal sur le canola et les voitures électriques et rien de plus? La nature même des relations diplomatiques, c'est d'être capable d'aborder des questions qui sont difficiles, qui sont sensibles, et le cas de M. Celil en est une. C'est inacceptable que le gouvernement canadien n'ait jamais pu offrir, ne serait-ce qu'une rencontre avec des officiels de l'ambassade du Canada en Chine avec M. Celil. C'est inacceptable que ça dure depuis 20 ans. C'est inacceptable que sa famille ait aucune nouvelle. Écoutez, quand on est rendu, après 20 ans, que comme demande, ce soit un coup de téléphone à sa famille, je pense qu'on devrait aller bien plus loin, bien entendu, mais on est obligé de commencer par ça. Et ça fait mal au cœur à chaque fois lorsqu'on pense à M. Celil. Donc, je vais en rester là pour l'instant. Je demande au gouvernement de faire ce qu'il doit faire, c'est-à-dire offrir des services consulaires à M. Celil, demander et exiger du gouvernement chinois qu'il puisse y avoir une rencontre entre l'ambassade du Canada en Chine et M. Celil. C'est tout simplement la norme, normalement. C'est un citoyen canadien qui voyageait avec un passeport canadien qui est enfermé, que la Chine ne reconnaisse ou pas sa citoyenneté canadienne. Elle existe, c'est un fait, et le gouvernement doit aller de l'avant là-dedans et doit faire sa job de gouvernement. Et j'espère que le message sera entendu. Merci.
We want to thank everyone for being here today. We will now be taking questions. If there are any. Go ahead.
Oh, hi, Mari Wolf from the Globe and Mail. Could you just refresh my memory about the charges that he faced and whether he's actually had a trial?
I believe we can open the question. Yeah.
Thank you. And if you, the Chinese government did not share the verdict, but there are some reports on September 2006, and it's saying that it is the main important charge is the separatism, splitting the country. That was the charge. And we haven't seen China separated, split it yet. It is the same China staying there.
Was there a trial?
Pardon me?
Was there a trial?
It was secret trial, closed trial. It was not open trial before September 2006. And the September, I don't know the exact date, maybe in the middle of September, and we knew that he was sentenced for life imprisonment.
And one addition to that is that in around 2016 or 2017, the life sentence was reportedly commuted to a 20-year life prison sentence. But our understanding is that the 20 years begin running from that moment. So it's not that that goes back to when he had originally been convicted. So that means the prospect of him being imprisoned at least for another 10 years is still very real.
You'd like a phone call with his family, but he hasn't been heard of for 10 years. Is this in fact, are you seeking really proof of life?
Please, Mehmet, can you answer that question?
As Alex said, and the last time we heard indirectly about Huseyin Celil was February 2nd, 2016, from the press release issued from Duhua Foundation based in San Francisco. Duhua means in English dialogue. It was chaired by John Kam, or one gentleman based in San Francisco. He was known to work for prisoners of conscience, and a number of prisoners released because of that organization's work. And so that organization issued a statement on February 2nd, 2016, and saying that it was the announcement of Chinese judicial system to reduce the 11 persons jail term from indefinite to fixed term for 20 years. And Huseyin Celil's name was mentioned in that statement. When I checked the source link, it didn't work. And what was the source of that statement? Just I cannot able to tell because that source link is not working. But it was originated from San Francisco-based Duhua Foundation on February 2nd, 2016. That was the last information.
But fellow prisoners in that, wherever he's held, there's been no communication from them, evidence that he's still alive. Okay.
Yeah, we don't know. Since 2016, even we haven't heard anything from Huseyin Celil's own siblings in Kashgar. The Chinese government most likely did not permit any family visits since then, and there is no any message from Uyghur region, from his family members to his wife in Burlington, Ontario. So it is total information blackout since 2016.
Just one more thing. You raised you implied that because he's not a Canadian-born citizen, perhaps he's getting second-class treatment. I wondered if you could possibly expand on that, because as you say, the two Michaels received an enormous amount of attention, as has Jimmy Lai, who actually is not a Canadian citizen. And I wondered if any of you have any indication whether the government, Anand or the Prime Minister, raised his case on their recent visit to China, because they did raise other human rights issues.
Should we do answer?
Okay. Maybe Alex, maybe you are the better.
I think that the very real concern that he is being given second-class treatment because of his foreign-born Canadian nationality has always been there. No one is suggesting there's ever been anything specifically said that confirms that, but the fact that for 20 years his case has never received that level of attention leaves that possibility, leaves that prospect. I think within the community, for the family, it's impossible not to believe that somehow his case is not being given the same urgency because of the nature of his nationality. And in terms of recent specific confirmation of either the Prime Minister or Minister Anand having raised the case, to my knowledge, that there's been no indication that that has been the case. We've often been told over the years, don't worry, be assured, the case is raised whenever it can be. But we don't get any specific indication back as to when it was raised, by whom, what was the response. So no, there's no specific indication that it's been raised at those very senior levels by the Canadian government recently, and it's so important that that happen.
Just to add on this one, I'm sure if you ask the Prime Minister about the two Michaels, he will know about the files, the complete file. If you ask the Prime Minister about Huseyin Celil, I'm not even sure he knows who it is. So that's the main point. I'm sure if you ask him the question, what about Huseyin Celil, he won't be able to answer because I'm probably he doesn't know about the file. So that's another indicator that when you are a citizen-born Canadian, you get better treatment than when you get the citizenship after you were born.
If I can add.
And maybe, no, your turn.
I think also the issue here is how other countries deal with Canadians who have origins when they're born outside of Canada. That is a key issue. And how we as a country defend our Canadians who have roots outside of the country. And everyone in this country must be dealt with the same in the same way and must be defended with the same vigor. So that's part of what we are seeing here today, is that other countries are dealing with a Canadian citizen that has roots outside of Canada differently than they would with a Canadian citizen who has roots for generations within this country. And there should be no differentiation. When other states deal with a Canadian, they are dealt with solely as a Canadian. What we're finding in this case is that China is not recognizing his Canadian citizenship. And that is where we have an issue as a country. We will defend our Canadians. We must defend our Canadians equally and vigorously.
Do you mind if I just ask a more general question about the Uyghurs for you, sir? The head of CSIS at the Public Safety Committee earlier this week said that transnational repression is still a very live and troubling issue. I paraphrase what he said. But I wondered if the Uyghur community in Canada has experienced anything like that. Could you talk more generally about what the kind of climate is?
Huseyin Celil is the perfect, the textbook example of transnational repression. And it happened 20 years ago when we didn't even know what is the transnational repression. And we have been raising this issue. And just because of the transnational repression targeting Uyghurs, diaspora members, so widespread, that's why the Canadian government, the Canadian Parliament, adopted that motion M62 to offer some sort of protection for a limited number of Uyghurs. And in Canada, just the total restriction of communication between Camilla, his wife, and Huseyin Celil, another form of transnational repression. It is total isolation, blackout, and just blockage of communication between family members, between parents. That is another way, just using Chinese government, those kind of personal connection as a vulnerability of another person to push them to comply with the Chinese norms. That is a typical way of transnational repression. It is widespread for every Canadian citizen of Uyghur origin, regardless in Toronto, Ontario, or Vancouver.
Also, on this exact topic of transnational repression, the Subcommittee of International Human Rights this Monday actually dealt with this issue, and also the case of Huseyin Celil was raised in committee this Monday, so one can go back and see that testimony.
Yeah. Good point.
Any further questions? All right. Thank you for being present. We'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Thank you.